As I told the children, our stories are worth sharing. Our faith and our tradition are worth sharing. We participate in the legacy of all those who in all ages and in all places thought for themselves, welcomed the stranger. They were guided by conscience and by justice. Our stories have such deep meaning. And when we tell our stories, we create an opportunity to welcome others into that experience. Perhaps opportunities to give people another vision of what might be possible, sharing something of our new vision. And just like when we light the chalice, we light it so that its light may shine. We don't light it and then place a basket on top of it, right? Because that would be a fire hazard, wouldn't it? We light it so that it can cast out its glow for all. It's not just for ourselves. And when we light the chalice, we express our willingness and our readiness to not only be transformed ourselves, but to allow the occasion for others to be transformed too. And I have a transformational experience to tell you about. Last Sunday, I wasn't here. Many of you know this. Because I and a group of 26 of us, a really large delegation, we were in Providence at our annual General Assembly. Now, many of you in this room know what General Assembly is, but for those who don't, it's the annual meeting of the Unitarian Universalist Association, and it happens in different cities across the country. This year it was in Providence. And of all the GAs I've gone to, this has been the most powerful, the most meaningful. A long time ago, before I had ever gone to a GA, I asked a friend of mine, a colleague in ministry, what is this GA thing that people make such a big deal out of? And she said to me that GA is like the UU Mecca. And those of you who have gone can relate to that experience and can understand that description. It's like the UU Mecca, and it's something that every UU should go to at least once in their lifetime, similar to making the Hajj. And she was kind of being facetious and painting it in that language as a pilgrimage, making the pilgrimage to the UU Mecca. But that's what it is. It's an opportunity for UUs from all over the country and all around the world to gather in one place and to worship together, to share our stories, to do the business of the association, which isn't actually as dry as it might sound, the business of the association. For instance, this year we voted to divest, the UUA voted to divest from fossil fuels, which is an amazing, amazing thing to do, and maybe something that can inspire our congregations. But it's an opportunity to worship, to tell our stories, to do the business of the association, and most of all, it's an opportunity to witness. Because how many occasions will we have to gather with 4,000 or 5,000 Unitarian Universalists from all over the country and around the world, and to show our support, for example, for the hotel workers in Providence who are working without a proper contract? We don't get an opportunity to make statements like that in our everyday experience because most UUs aren't as fortunate as we are here in Philadelphia. We're a mid-sized congregation of over 300 members. Most of our UU congregations around the country have 30 or 40 or 60 members. So imagine how wonderful it is for them to have that experience, as well as folks from our congregation. So in Providence, in addition to the worship and the storytelling and the business of the association and the learning opportunities, all of us in our delegation attended a number of workshops that I'm sure we will be sharing with you the insights of those workshops very soon. We got to tell our story in Providence in a very big way. And here's why it was a big way this year. So I'm a very visual person. I learn by seeing, I learn by doing. Don't tell me how to get to a place, show me how to get there. And maybe show me a picture of what the destination looks like. So images and symbols are very important to me. This year, for the very first time in the city of Providence, we sponsored the art installation called Water Fire. Now, some of you know what Water Fire is. It's a permanent art installation that consists of fire pits that float in the center of the Providence River. The Providence River runs through the center of Providence. Imagine that. And usually it's sponsored by corporations, the universities, and other institutions. This is the first time it's been sponsored by a faith-based group. And in sponsoring it, the UUA said that we're going to use it as an opportunity to share the theme of our General Assembly. Each year, General Assembly has a theme. This year, it was Love Reaches Out. So the theme of Water Fire was love reaching out. So on Saturday night, thousands of us UUs, the 5,000 of us there, in addition to the thousands of people who come to Water Fire just because it's a wonderful art installation, all gathered along the banks of the Providence River. And as night fell, the president of our association, Peter Morales, and the moderator, Jim Key, carried these enormous torches. The torches must have been as tall as they were, down the streets of Providence to the basin where the water fire begins, and lit the first of what must have been 100 bonfires. The city that night was lit with these gorgeous bonfires that were accompanied by beautiful world and new agey sounding music. And it was an experience that you could, there's something about fire being lit and the experience of water and the music. It's just like the perfect recipe that awakens something deep inside of us. There's a kind of, we remember that. Maybe there's a primal intuition about, wow, when the fire is lit, something special is happening right now. So we had these hundreds of bonfires lit, saying to the world that something special is happening right now. And that something special was the notion that love reaches out. So in addition to that notion of love reaching out, the atmosphere of the water fire was all about peace and a lovely French word, bon ami. You know, being a good friend, there was friendship in the air. There was peace and there was courage in the air at this water fire. And all of these things, we experience that courage, we experience that peace, we experience that bon ami here at USG. That's part of our story as Unitarian Universalists, in addition to the idea of love reaching out. So while Water Fire is an art installation, while we were there, we used it as an opportunity to tell our story as Unitarian Universalists. And what better way could we tell our story as Unitarian Universalists than having the entire Providence River lit up, not with floating fire pits. That's for the unperceptive eye. We had the Providence River lit up with floating chalices. A city lit up with chalices. Little did they know. When we light the chalice, we don't light it to cover it. We light it so that its light can shine. We light it because we are about to tell an important story about our faith. And that's what I want us to do when we leave here today, is to have the courage to share the stories of our faith. Because we have some great stories of our faith. And I'm excited by them, and I hope that you'll be excited by them too. So in our call to worship, I mentioned the name of John Murray. And I know that there are a few scholars here who know about John Murray. But I'm going to tell you a story, and you can, after the service, you can correct me if I miss a fact. But it's a good one. And the facts of the story don't matter quite as much as the meaning behind them, where they take us to. They are part of what it means to be a Unitarian Universalist. And to make the connection between our particular story in the person of John Murray, I also want us to make a connection to where that fits in to the larger American story. Because we've been here from the very, very beginning. We've been here, in fact, before the beginning of the United States. So our story is deeply intertwined in ways that are obvious to the American story, and in ways that are a bit more subtle. So we've been an independent country now, as I mentioned in the prayer, for 238 years. 6 years before that, before the 13 original colonies decided that they would be done with the Crown of England and all of the things associated with that, the state church, the Church of England, the power of King George III and his military, which was formidable. A man made a journey from England to New York, or at least he hoped that he would wind up in New York. And his name was John Murray. Now, when John Murray left England, he was really at the end of his rope in the figurative sense. He left England after leaving debtor's prison, which is not a good place to be. He left England after his wife and son died of illness. He left England bankrupt, heartbroken, and disillusioned. And he was disillusioned because all of these tragedies happened in succession, and they all seemed to happen right after he met up with this guy named James Relly. Now, James Relly was an Anglo-Irish minister in the Methodist tradition. And he was pretty radical, a radical Methodist. We like Methodists usually. This was a radical Methodist, so we would have really liked him. And he was going around from church to church in Ireland and England, James Relly was, preaching this radical notion of universal salvation. And John Murray listened to his sermons and in time became convinced that, hey, James really has his finger on the pulse of things. This may be something that I should consider sharing the message of too. This is good news. This is really good news. This isn't what the Church of England is telling us. This isn't what our Methodist churches are telling us. This idea that not only do we have one source, I think we all can agree that we have one source, but within the Christian context, we have one destiny, and it's a good one, was a message that few people had heard at that point, but some were definitely ready to embrace. So after linking up with James Relly, John Murray began going around talking about this idea of universal salvation. And people who spoke about universal salvation at that time weren't looked upon very favorably. You see, most people thought, well, if you didn't believe in a hell, because that's what universal salvation has to do with, heaven and hell, that you probably were a pretty wretched person and you would do all sorts of things if you didn't have the fear above you at all times that you could be punished eternally, right? You couldn't be good unless someone had a cudgel over you, making you be good. Or at least that's what people thought. We know that one can be good and ought to be good for the sake of goodness, not for any reward or punishment. So the idea of universal salvation was counteracting that, contradictory message. Folks didn't like that. So it seemed that while John Murray was very excited about this message, it kind of precipitated his downfall. So when he was on that boat, the Hand in Hand, sailing across the Atlantic, he thought for sure that he would have nothing to do with universalism or universalistic ideas ever again. Little did he know. So the ship, the Hand in Hand, on its way to New York, was turned back. They couldn't go to New York. The tariffs were too high in New York. So they had to go to the next best place, Philadelphia. So the Hand in Hand sailed down the Jersey coast, probably close to Cape May, but not close enough because it got caught on a sandbar and never made it to Philadelphia. That sandbar was off the coast of a place curiously named Good Luck, New Jersey. Good luck for John Murray. He was sent off the ship with some men to the town of Good Luck to find supplies and to find help to see if they could get the ship off the sandbar. And while in town, John Murray encounters a very strange old man. And I'm sure he must have thought, well, geez, when it rains, it pours. This man was Thomas Potter. And Thomas Potter was well into his dotage. And he was filled, some might even say possessed, with these strange visions. And these visions had to do with the idea that at some point, a teacher would come and preach a new message in this place that everyone needed to hear. And in order for that preacher to do that, Thomas Potter would have to build a meeting house for him by himself, by hand. Thomas Potter was well into his 80s at the time. No one in Good Luck, New Jersey took Thomas Potter seriously. And that's the very man that John Murray had the chance of meeting. And when Thomas Potter met John Murray, he said, "You are the one I've been waiting for. I built this meeting house for you. You are the one." Because the person who is going to be in this meeting house was built for someone to preach this new message, and that new message has to do with universal salvation, universalism, and you are him. John Murray, I'm sure, was thinking, no, I'm not him. I couldn't be less him. I'm doing something else. I'm done with that. I'm trying to start over. They say this is a new world. New things happen here. I'm doing new things. But Potter was convinced, no, you are the man. You are the person who is going to deliver this message, and I need you to do this. So after much convincing, John Murray does preach his message on universal salvation in Good Luck, New Jersey, on September 30th, 1770. And it turns out that he was a hit. People who heard his message were actually quite excited by this idea of universal salvation. Now, we don't know if they were excited because of all of the technicalities of how, is there a heaven, is there not a heaven, who gets in, when do they get in? what are the mechanics of it? They weren't excited so much by that, but they were excited, I like to think, by the underpinnings of it. The underpinnings of universal salvation have to do with this radical equality. This really radical, we begin in the same place and we end in the same place. There's no hierarchy of prince and paupers. There's only one destiny, and it's with a benevolent God. Now, this really touched a nerve, I think, with these colonial people for another reason, too. The relations with England and with King George weren't particularly good, even at that point. And I think that just at that time, just as the seeds of the revolution were beginning to germinate, that this message of radical equality may have been the thing that pushed them over the edge. That may have been the tipping point. Because John Murray didn't stop just in Good Luck, New Jersey. People were so excited by this, he wound up going to other churches up and down the East Coast, eventually settling outside of Boston in Gloucester. People were excited about this radical new story, about his story, but about the larger story that we all fit into. John Murray later went on to serve in George Washington's Continental Army as a chaplain. Again, another opportunity to spread his story about universal salvation and what that could mean in the here and now. We weren't just talking about the life hereafter with universalism. We're talking about how we might live right now. Because often how we think about the hereafter, or if there's a hereafter, affects how we are in this reality. This is one of our stories, one of many amazing stories that are at the heart of our Unitarian and Universalist traditions. And that's just one thing that I want you to take away. Now, I'm going to, as I find my place in the notes, I want you to hold up Murray's example in your mind. This idea of going someplace and being willing to expose yourself, being willing to try again in the effort of sharing your story of faith. Murray tested his faith. He made allowances for arriving at new answers. And when I first learned about his story at the place that we now know as Murray Grove, New Jersey, our retreat center there, I was inspired to tell my story. We are all, as Unitarian Universalists, on a search for deeper truth and meaning. We take that very seriously. And it's not just something that we do here on Sundays. It's something that we do throughout our lives. It's what makes us distinct. And that is a story that I want for us to share in the wider world. Now, I know that for many of us, we're a little bit shy about our faith tradition. I know that I am. And here I am at GA. You know why GA was also really special for me? Because I was welcomed into preliminary fellowship as a minister. That's a big deal. So, thank you. But even I at times find that I'm a little bit shy. I'm a little reticent about telling people about what I do and why it matters to me. And I know that there are those of us here who also have that same reticence. People in our own lives, our neighbors and friends, know that we disappear every Sunday for 2 hours at a time, and they have no idea where we go or what happens there. And those who do know that we go to the Unitarian Society of Germantown only know that, the name of the place. but not very much about what happens right here. And, because of artistic conventions in the 1920s and 30s, our building communicates a message that's a little bit different from the people we are today. We have Jesus, who is our wonderful teacher, but one of many teachers for us as Unitarian Universalists. So the charge that I make to you is to know our story, to know our origin stories, to know about people like John Murray and Thomas Potter, know that we were there from the beginning and before the beginning of the United States, and to be able to share that message, in addition to sharing your own story of faith. I want us to not be shy about our experiences. Maybe we don't need to take over an entire city with our chalice symbol, but there are other ways that we can tell that special story. So friends, I want us to be encouraged and inspired. I want to encourage and inspire you to tell that story. Tell Aunt Esther, tell Cousin Robert, tell your neighbor, tell your friends what matters most to you on this faith journey that you are on, because it is special, it is unique. Share it. The world needs for you to share it. And I want us to start today. So I invite you now to, Brené Brown talks about leaning into the discomfort, to lean in towards your neighbor. To lean towards your neighbor, maybe look them in the eye. This is an exercise. And to say, neighbor, you have an important story.
You have an important story.
A story of faith. A story of discovery. The people around you deserve to hear it. Amen. And may it be so.